Hello, welcome to our Hive studios. My name is Lina Vaz, I'm content editor at Hive. With me today I have Andrea Woodside, who you may recognize from our Spring Fair retail stage. She's a practicing clinical psychologist for over 30 years, working in workplace well-being with a particular focus on retail. Thank you so much for being with us, Andrea.
It's lovely to see you. Thank you.
You've been working in this area for many years now. What are the main changes that you notice since you started?
Well, I think certainly that if we take the mental health space separately from the retail space, I'd first start off by saying that mental health has changed dramatically in my 30 plus years of practice. And as much as 30 years ago, you would speak to employers about mental health and they just didn't want to know. Whereas now it's literally an open door. People are talking about it more, and I think employers and particularly retailers are showing a real commitment to openly talking about it, to supporting people in the workplace, and not shying away from some of those difficult conversations. And the reason I say retail is because retail, as we know, is a very, very challenging sector, and certainly the pandemic showed us more than ever that retail was certainly a challenge. So it's been great to see lots and lots of positive conversations, but, you know, to be fair, there is still a ways to go.
And with more and more people sharing their struggles with mental health, from royals to supermodels, do you think it's no longer a taboo, or things still need to change a little bit?
Well, I think to your point, it's much less of a taboo than it was even, I would say, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I think it's brilliant that there's lots of people talking from all walks of life and all different types of experiences, talking about their mental health and their well-being. I think, yes, it's a positive and it's driven the conversation forward, which I think is great. However, I think we need to be aware that there will always be doubters. There will always be the people who say, oh, it's all in somebody's head, or they're just looking for attention, or it's just an excuse for not performing. Nothing could be further from the truth. We know that mental health issues have a serious impact on people's day-to-day well-being at work and at home. You can't separate the two. So whilst I think we have benefited from hearing some very intimate and very powerful stories from people in the public eye, we have a little ways to go. But I'm pretty hopeful that, you know, the more we talk about it, when we bring something into the light, it doesn't have the power anymore. So my best advice is let's all keep talking about mental well-being.
According to the Mental Health Foundation, more support in the workplace would save retailers up to £8 billion per year. Do you think retailers are aware of this?
To be fair, I don't think it's just retailers that aren't aware of it. I think it's, you know, sort of an issue across the UK. 8 billion is an eye-watering figure, and it's very difficult to conceptualize of that kind of loss if you were to look at it as a loss to business. I don't think that many people are aware of that. I think what we need to do, however, is start where we can, strip back the 8 billion, which I agree, you know, is fantastic that they were able to do that great research. However, I think what's helpful for us on the ground is to sort of say, let's take the 8 billion away for a second and focus on what's contributing to those costs. Most people will assume that that cost is predominantly made up of absenteeism, but that's actually not the case. That cost is impacted more than most people would be aware by something we call presenteeism. And presenteeism means that somebody is at work but not at work. The lights are on but nobody's home. It means that people are coming to work, they're struggling through a day, they're trying to stay focused, but they're not really able to mentally, emotionally, or physically, or all three, give it their all.
So they're not engaged with what they're doing.
Yeah. And there's lots of different reasons for that. But I think if we look at that 8 billion, if we start to sort of think about presenteeism as a core issue for a lot of businesses, not just retail, then we can start to think about let's start where we can. Absenteeism still is an issue. But what's interesting is you know, we look back on 2008-9, the last global recession, and what we saw was a marked decline in absenteeism, but a marked uptick of presenteeism. And that's it's an interesting thing. It was an interesting phenomenon. And we knew that this would happen during COVID. So when COVID first kind of evented, a lot of us were thinking, oh, this is going to be very interesting to see what happens with absenteeism. Absenteeism rates plummeted because people were at work, because they felt that they needed to be. It was a time of great fear and churn. But inevitably what that means is if I'm not bringing my whole self to work, then I'm going to be suffering from presenteeism. I don't get the best out of my work, my employer doesn't get the best out of my work, and certainly our customers don't get the best. What are the ways? I guess the big question is, how can we support people with presenteeism?
Yes, that was exactly my next question. How can retailers support their staff?
Well, you know, I think one of the reasons that we're seeing, I mean, we've just been through literally a marathon, and you know, it's not quite over yet. You know, things are quite difficult still. What I would suggest is recognizing that all of us need to take annual leave. Annual leave is not a nice to have, it's essential. Self-care is not selfish, it's essential. So part of that is taking annual leave. Part of that is supporting our people to take breaks at work, to hydrate properly, to keep their blood sugar up. I don't know about you, but when I get hangry, I am a nightmare. Nobody comes near me. I'm not. It's not a pretty picture. So if it's something as simple, and again, this is a much more complex thing than just saying everybody should be eating during the day, but these little things can add up to huge change. What we want people to feel is that their employers are absolutely behind the idea of taking the annual leave that's due to you, taking that rest, having those breaks, having access to a really good support system, whether that's internally, it could be, you know, if somebody has mental health first aiders, for example, or our Wellbeing Warriors, the very similar program designed for retail by Retail Trust. Or, you know, having a space where somebody can go and get some time with a clinician, somebody who is qualified. And that could be through an employee assistance program. It could be through your local Mind, for example. So there's lots of different ways. And I think it's about employers giving their people the tools and the knowledge and the education to know how to get better and to stay well.
Post-pandemic turnover is a big question for retailers. How can they retain their staff?
I think there has been so much talk about turnover in the retail sector, and I think it is a very real and present challenge, perhaps more so for retail than other sectors. So it is a reality. I think partly what's driving this is a lot of people came through the pandemic with a need to question their next steps, to sort of look at their bigger picture. You know, what do I want to do with my career, my relationship, my family, my home, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a time of huge, big questions. Now there's going to be natural attrition. There were people who decided they were going to move 200 miles away, and therefore it wasn't feasible for them to continue if they were office-based or indeed store-based. Well, there were other people who kind of thought, yeah, I'd actually like to retrain in something totally different. And I think this is a positive in as much as if there are people in an organization who feel a yearning for something beyond what they're doing, then I think it's perfectly reasonable that they seek that. And I think it's perfectly also understandable that retailers can sometimes take that a bit personally. There's no need to take that personally. It's not about the retailer, it's not about the brand. It's about a human being just recognizing, whoa, this past 2 years has been seismic and everything has changed and nothing is the same. I want to move forward in a different way. I think for those retailers that I speak to regularly about this very issue, I think it's not necessarily a kind of formal coaching role, because unless you're a qualified accredited coach, one shouldn't be coaching. But just sort of from a human point of view, just a sort of mentoring, maybe helping somebody to think through their options. Conversations can actually keep people from leaving. And it's not about, bigger paychecks, and we know that that's not always possible anyway. But for most people, I would say for the majority of people after the pandemic, it's not about that. Yes, we have huge financial turmoil going on in people's lives. We have a lot of want. We have a lot of need. However, I think when it comes down to for most people, people don't leave because of the pay. They leave because they can't necessarily see a reason to stay. So I would suggest that managers talk about, having these conversations. Don't shy away from it. Again, it's about bringing something into the light, because when something's brought into the light, it no longer has the power. There's no fear around that. There's no secrecy. Mm-hmm. Having that conversation of, how are you doing? And what are your career plans? And can you tell me a little bit more about what you might need from me as a manager, what you might need from me as a human being, but also what do you need from us as an organization? Some people will naturally leave, and that's okay. That's okay, because we have to recognize that there's huge new blood coming in as well. Yes. So it all balances out. It's a funny old thing about life, isn't it? Yeah.
But it's all about having those conversations at the right time.
Yeah. And not waiting until we notice that somebody just isn't engaged or is passionate. But to be able to have those really honest conversations, and no harm, no foul. I'm not here to judge. You're not going to be in trouble if I say to you, hey, tell me what's going on. And sometimes, again, it can be just also about signposting. If a retailer has an employee assistance program such as Retail Trust, maybe connecting that person who you feel isn't quite as happy in their role as they once were, exploring and teasing that out. It could also, frankly, sometimes we think it's about the job. I would argue that a lot of the time it's stuff in our personal lives that stop us from seeing the value and the passion and the excitement of what we do in the day, because we spend so much time trying to fight fires in our personal lives that by the time we get to work, we're absolutely exhausted. We don't really have a lot left. So I think for managers, it's useful to maybe not assume it's one or the other. It's caused by this or caused by that. Ask the question and be there as a supporter, not a counselor, not a coach, and not as a career counselor, if you will, but just another human being who can say, you might be struggling, what can I do?
And in terms of retail staff in particular, we hear more and more news about abusive behavior from customers. What can retailers do to protect their staff from this type of thing?
I'm pretty long in the tooth, and some might even say it can be quite cynical. Even I have been shocked at some of the behaviors that we have heard our colleagues in retail have faced. Whether you're on the shop floor or your customer service or you're elsewhere in the business, the level of abuse has been horrifying. What's interesting, in 2021, Retail Trust, we did a piece of work where we talked to a lot of retailers about this very issue, about harassment and abuse, verbal, physical, racial, homophobic abuse, whatever people have had to face, abuse of all kinds. And we're surprised to find that 15% of retailers had actually started to kind of think about, what do we do next? How do we kind of progress this? But that leaves a huge number of retailers who haven't necessarily really thought about that. There have been lots of other priorities for retailers. Okay, so to be fair, it's not a castigation in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. But the reality is that this has become, we're at a point where people are expecting to go to work to be abused, and that is wrong on every single level. Yes. One of the things that Retail Trust has done, we've partnered with a very large UK law firm, and they're Foot Anstey. You can find lots of information about this partnership. It's about campaigning and combating harassment in retail. So we're working together with Foot Anstey, And we've developed a program whereby retailers can get the right support, get their policies looked at, get really, really good in-depth understanding of what they can be doing in order to mitigate the risk, but also to ensure that people remain resilient and well. So if anybody's interested, you can find that at our website, which is retailtrust.org.uk.
And considering this issue and other issues as well, managers are left to deal with most of it with no one to look after them. And this is something that you brought up in the retail stage at the Spring Fair.
Yeah.
What can be done about this?
Well, I think, it's very interesting to me. I speak to a lot of managers. I see managers all the time and talk to them all the time, and they're tired. They're really tired. And a lot of them talk to me about, what do I do with somebody who has complex, they might have mental health issues, or they may have very complex personal life events going on, or they may be facing something entirely unrelated to home. It could be work stress. It could be things like that. The question is often, how do I support them? And I would argue you need to support yourself before you can support anybody else. We're seeing an increase in managers feeling overwhelmed, and I think that's a good word for this, overwhelmed by the sheer demand on them and their time and their psychological space to kind of fix other people's issues. It's not the manager's job to do that. It's not the manager's job to do that. And I think I talked at Hive, didn't I, around, if you look at it like the manager is a lighthouse. So remember we sort of talked about, a lighthouse stands proud. It stands proud of the ocean. So it's not in the ocean. It's not drowning with the ship. It's actually on very terra firma. It's very firm, solid ground. And it doesn't move into the ocean. But what it does is it picks up that there's an issue there and then shines the light and guides the ship to safety. And we would suggest that managers are lighthouses of their teams. They have enough perspective of the whole team to be able to understand this person might need some support, there's something else going on. I need to approach and have a conversation. But also, instead of fixing that person, instead of being there for an hour once a week, which is a therapist's role, not a manager's role, they can signpost to the right support. So they don't get overwhelmed by it, but they're still offering compassionate care and support. It is doable.
Thank you so much for being with us today and for your amazing insights. And thank you all for watching.